The Colorado River Basin drains about 250,000 square miles. What's 250,000 square miles? Well, it's about 2.5 times the size of the state of Colorado. It's about 1/12 of the continuous 48 states. So it's a big area. 250,000 square miles happens to be almost the same as the Columbia River Basin. How many of you have heard of the Columbia River Basin, the mighty Columbia that flows, has its headwaters up in Canada, flows into Washington, drains the major tributaries like the Snake, and has its mouth at the just west of Portland. So the Columbia River Basin and the Colorado River Basin together, or both of them, are about 250,000 square miles. Yet the flow of the Columbia River at the mouth is probably 12 to 15 times greater than the Colorado River. So we always think of the Colorado River as one of the west of the United States' great rivers. It is in terms of drainage, but not necessarily in terms of flow. In fact, if you were to rank the Colorado River in terms of natural flow, and by natural flow is that we could back the clock up about 500 years and measure it, before we started impacting it with cities and dams and things like irrigation systems and things like that, the Colorado River ranks slightly more flow at the mouth than the Mohawk, and slightly less than the Illinois River. Okay, now I think probably many of you probably have heard of the Mohawk, of course, because it goes through New York City, but how many of you heard of the Illinois River? Well, yeah, so there you go. A few of you have. So you can see the Colorado River is a relatively small river on a large area. And why? Well, we all know why, because the Colorado River Basin, which from here down to Mexico, drains large areas of low and high desert. And in fact, if you look at the Colorado River Basin, if you look at the map that John had mentioned, there's a small sliver of highlands above about 9,000 feet that basically begin in very northern New Mexico into the San Juans, run up through Gunnison County, up through where we can go outside and see them right here, all the way on up through Steamboat Springs, out up into the Wind Rivers, and then it kind of comes back around down through the Uintas. Small sliver of land that makes up about 5% of the Colorado River Basin, which is above about 9,500 feet in elevation. A little bit more down on the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, that's above about 8,000 to 9,000 feet. Most of the water that flows in the river originates from this very tiny sliver of land that basically surrounds the basin in what we know of as our mountains. So it's a relatively large drainage system, drainage river on what is basically a desert area, as we know. Give you an example. The precipitation on Independence Pass is about 50 inches a year. The average precipitation in the basin is about 12. Now let's also talk about geography. The river is used by 7 states, and it's used by 2 countries, Mexico and U.S. So 7 states and Mexico. But it's not just used in the geographic basin of the Colorado River, it's used in the adjacent basins. This is what makes it much more interesting from a political perspective and from a water management perspective. Let's start in basically the southeastern corner of the basin, in the towns of Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico. A major portion of their water comes from the Colorado River, from a tributary to the San Juan. As if we were to take, I-25 north, and continue on into Pueblo. Pueblo gets its water right up here, right above us on the Roaring Fork Basin. Colorado Springs, again, major source of water is the Colorado River, even though Colorado Springs is on the Arkansas Basin. Denver, of course. How many of you have been, you've all been, I know, to Denver on I-70. A large reservoir in Summit County called Dillon Reservoir, great looking place. Well, there's a tunnel that starts at the bottom of that reservoir, it's 26 miles to the east, to the North Fork of the South Platte River. That reservoir is the major component of Denver water's supply. So as we continue, Boulder, Longmont, Greeley, Fort Collins, even Cheyenne, Wyoming, okay, up in Wyoming, major source of the supplies for those cities is the Colorado River. Why? Well, because the smaller streams that they were on, the South Platte, or the Arkansas River, or what have you, the Cache-la-Poudre, they were fully used by the late 1900s. So the Colorado River, and if we continue on, let's go down in the Wasatch Front, Salt Lake City, Provo. Most of the folks that live in Utah live on what they call the Wasatch Front. The Wasatch Front does not have enough native water to supply the demands from basically Ogden down through Salt Lake City and through Provo. So they import water from the Colorado River, from the Deschutes. Continuing to the south, Los Angeles, this is what's called the Southern California Coastal Plain, basically from about Santa Barbara south to San Diego, including Tijuana, actually. The Southern California Coastal Plain, 20 million people. Major source of water for the Southern California coastal water, or coastal plain, there's four. They have imports from the north, they have the Colorado River, they have the Owens River, and they have local sources. By 1900, the local sources were all used. So the Colorado River is a major source of water for Los Angeles, San Diego, and through a separate pipeline, even Tijuana, the Tijuana area in Mexico. If you go internally within the basin, the only major metropolitan area that actually is next to the river that uses water is the city of Las Vegas. Continuing on into Arizona, the major cities of Arizona are the towns of Phoenix, or the cities of Phoenix and Tucson. Phoenix and Tucson, they are on tributaries to the Gila River. They are part of the Colorado River system. But the water supplies that they developed with their local sources, including groundwater and including the Gila River system, were fully used a long time ago. So back in the 60s, they got Congress to authorize a project called the Central Arizona Project, which pumps water uphill all the way from basically Parker to Phoenix and then on the way up into Tucson. So the Colorado River is amazing in terms of what it provides. With all that I've said, still about 75 to 80% of the Colorado River's uses is for irrigation, and only maybe 20% is for municipal uses, including Denver and Phoenix and Los Angeles. The interesting thing about the Colorado River right now is it is a system that is fully tapped. It's fully used. John will tell you about it, but since about 1998, not one drop of water has made it to the natural mouth of the river in the Gulf of Baja, California. So it's a fully used system. What are we facing? If we continue to look at what I just said, and I'll go through real quickly, down in New Mexico, Albuquerque's second source of water supply is groundwater. Well, they're overusing their groundwater, and they don't have, the Rio Grande is a relatively small stream compared to our rivers. So so future demands in New Mexico for municipal uses are likely to come from the conversion of San Juan Chama water from the Colorado River from agricultural purposes to municipal uses. In Colorado, Peter and I are on another forum when we talk about the gap. Well, what's the gap? Well, it's the gap between the water we need for future front range growth and what is available. And right now, the sources are additional Colorado River water if we have conservation, agricultural conversions. Those are the big three, okay? And it's a trade-off. Do we want agricultural conversions or do we want new supplies? So we're dealing with that. So the Colorado River, and you continue on into Utah. Utah has a project going on right now because their major growth area is a little place called St. George, which was about 5,000 people when I was a kid. And now it's a couple 100,000. And it's Utah, as they call it, Utah's Dixie. They are proposing a pipeline from Lake Powell about 150 miles to the west to meet future needs in the St. George area. Southern California is facing huge problems. There are water supplies on the Central California, or the State Water Project, which basically starts way north of Sacramento. They run the water down the Sacramento River near the delta at about 14 to 14 feet elevation above sea level. They have a big set of pumps. And they run that water down to the south, over the Tehachapi Mountains into California. California uses about 20% of its electricity is used to pump water. That's amazing. So, and what they're facing there are seawater intrusion, elevation, seawater, the ocean levels are rising. They're also facing from climate change. They're seeing that the Sierras, which are very different than the Colorado Rockies, the Sierras get a lot of snow at 5,000 feet. Well, how many of you know in Grand Junction, even Leavenworth Springs, we don't get a lot of snow at 5,000 feet. We get a lot of snow at 10, but not 5. They get a lot of snow at 5,000 feet and 6,000 and 7,000 feet that they rely on. In a few years from now, maybe 20 years from now, with temperature increases, even if precipitation is increased by climate change, that snow, that big reservoir, that's the biggest reservoir on the system, is going to be rain. So we're facing all of these problems. A second issue I want to talk about is how the Colorado River, in its geography, is essentially a big pipeline, a big controlled system. On the Columbia River, 225 million acre-feet, an acre-foot. If you watch a football game, you would figure that there's enough water to cover that football field a foot deep. That's about an acre-foot. Okay. 2 families of 4 will use 1 acre-foot per year of water. Well, 225 million acre-feet at the mouth of the Columbia. It has about 30 million acre-feet of storage, lots of storage. That's about, 10 to 12% of the river flow. On the Colorado River, Peter said maybe 15 million acre-feet of flow. We have 60 million acre-feet of storage. So we have 4 times the annual runoff in storage in places like Lake Mead, Lake Powell, Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, Root Eye. So it's a very regulated stream. So when we look at this, and I look down at the future and the geography, I'm saying what's going to happen as 2 things converge. First is the need for additional water both within the basin and outside the basin in places like Colorado Springs, in Cheyenne, in Salt Lake City, in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and a diminishing supply. Now, there's a little history. I've done a lot of looking at the Colorado River. And starting in 1920, they thought they had this much. By 1950, it was a little less. Today, it's even a little less. The lesson is the longer you look, now we look back 500 years based on some fairly good reconstructions that are based on tree rings and other things. We may not know exactly in a given year how much water flowed in the river in 1495, but based on tree rings and some other isotope analysis, we know a magnitude. We knew it was a dry year or a wet year, and we actually know quite a bit about the river. We now know that 2 times were the wettest, maybe out of the wettest 4 or 5 times in the last 500 years. One was the early 20s, well, from about 1900 to the early 20s, when we set the compact in place. And the other was from about 1970, about 1997 to 1998. And what happened in the basin between 1970 and 1998? Colorado, Rocky Mountain High, Southern California. That's when Phoenix went from 1 million to 5 million. So this huge period of growth throughout the basin happened in one of the wettest periods. So what's going to happen in the future as we recognize that there's a river out there that we all rely on, not just for municipal supplies, but we recreate on it. We just like to watch it. We fish in it. It's a part of our people. It's a part of our culture. What happens in the future as there are more demands for that river, and perhaps as nature changes it fundamentally, maybe probably less flow, and it changes the timing of it. So those are kind of set the stage in the geography. And I like to think of, you can't think of the Colorado River and only think of the Roaring Fork Basin or only think of western Colorado. You really got to think of what's going on in 7 states and 2 countries when you think of the Colorado River. Thank you.